This is Elected, a podcast for women and our active accomplices in and around politics. I'm your host, Sarah Elder Chaminara, and today my guest is Michelle Mungall. Hi, Michelle.
Hello. Good to be here. Good to be here over the airwaves.
Yes, you're in Nelson and I'm in Calgary. So before we get started, in the spirit of reconciliation, it's important for me to share my personal commitment to learning the history of colonialism and the ongoing systemic violence and oppression against Indigenous peoples. The land where I live, work, and record from is the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, Kainai, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda Nations, Métis Nation Region 3, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. So hi, Michelle, and you're joining me all the way from across the Rocky Mountains in Nelson, BC.
That's right. And I'm on the traditional territory of the Ktunaxa, Syilx, and Sinixt peoples.
Well, I'm really excited to talk with you because I worked in the legislature in BC as a political staffer when you got elected, and we belonged to different political parties. You're a former BC NDP MLA and cabinet minister, and I served as a political staffer for the BC Liberals. And so we have, but we still can chat.
That's right. We're both out of that building now, so we're not divided by the floor of the legislature and by the very nature of how the offices were set up in the legislature. And now we're just divided by some mountains. But thanks to Zoom, we can have a conversation.
Yeah, well, and I'm excited too because we ran into each other at an Equal Voice event when you were here during Stampede in the summer and had a good chat. And I'm excited to talk to you because, so for anyone who doesn't know you, so you have a long history in politics, actually, despite being still very young. So at 24, you were elected to Nelson City Council, and you were the youngest ever person, I believe. At 31, you were elected as an MLA for Nelson-Creston. You were the first female MLA for that riding. You served 12 years, which is actually a very long time in politics. And the last 3 you were in cabinet under Premier John Horgan in a minority government, which is like a whole other podcast.
Totally, right?
Right, yes. But of particular interest, I think, to everyone listening is that this is unbelievable, and you'll have to tell me the year, but you were actually the first MLA to bring your baby onto the floor of the BC Legislature in the House and are responsible for changing the rules so that all parents who had children can bring their children onto the floor. What year was that?
It was 2018. That's the year that I had Xavier. That's my first child. And he was just almost 3 months when he came onto the floor of the legislature. It was the second week of our fall sitting. And in the spring sitting, while I was still pregnant on International Women's Day, I don't want to take all the credit because it took all MLAs to unanimously agree to allow for parents or guardians to bring their infant child onto the floor of the legislature while the House was sitting. And some people might say like, oh, well, why was it so important to have rules to say that that was allowed? And it's because there's this rule in our parliamentary system that's used. Our parliamentary system is used in many jurisdictions around the world. And there's a rule called the stranger rule. And if there is a stranger, so someone who's not an MLA, someone who's not the sergeant of arms, not the speaker, not any of the clerks, or a page or any of the people who are already allowed to be on there with their specific job on the floor of the House, they have to be ejected. This rule has been used in the past to eject moms, always moms, it's never been dads, always moms with their babies. And in Canada, it was used in 2011 to do that. And sadly, in the UK, they haven't changed the rule in the UK Parliament. And it was used, I think it was just last year, to eject a mom who was breastfeeding while a debate was going on. And So there was a big debate around that. They still don't have an official change of the rules. So because this rule had actually been used to do exactly what nobody in the BC legislature wanted to happen, we all went forward and formally changed the rules on March 8th, 2018.
Well, thank you for doing that. I mean, it's so, in 2018, it kind of boggles the mind. And I think there was actually, I think also very recently, I think it was pre-downfall, like true downfall of Boris Johnson. There was a woman who maybe had just given birth or had some kind of issue. Anyway, she had to be wheeled onto the floor in a wheelchair to vote, and then was like wheeled back out. Like the systems obviously weren't designed for women. Obviously, they were designed for, men to just come and be men in a space, and they weren't designed for anything else. But men want to bring their families to work too, right? And Jagmeet Singh, I know, has brought his infant onto the floor of the House of Commons in Ottawa. Like it normalizes parents being politicians. And also, like, if your baby needs to eat and you're breastfeeding, or however you choose to feed your baby, then you should be able to feed your baby.
Absolutely. And so I'll just say so in the BC legislature, lots of parents have since brought their children onto the floor, which is awesome. For me, it was a real necessity, because we were minority government that won votes by one. So I was breastfeeding, and if a vote got called while I was nursing my child, I'd have to run from my office, which was like one of the corners of the legislature, one floor up from the actual house. But that building, like everything is very far from each other, unless you're in opposition, where all your offices get really close to each other in room 201.
Because they don't give you any space.
That's right. So opposition, it's cozy. Government, it's not. It's all
spacious offices. Yeah. Lots of room.
Yeah. And so I would have to, and this happens regularly. So I'm really glad we changed the rules, because from a practical standpoint, and this is what we were envisioning, especially what I was envisioning, why we needed to change the rules ahead of time. And as it turned out, I was correct. And so the bells would ring calling for a vote. And I'd be nursing Xavier, and I would have to literally unlatch him and pull the bra back up, fix my shirt, run out of my office, and go vote. Now, for a baby who's in the middle of nursing and it's not just feeding, it's also that bonding moment. There's an emotional attachment going on at that time that's really important, because emotional attachment is actually what helps form brain pathways, positive brain pathways. And so to just hand my baby off, is what some men have told other women to do in other jurisdictions, is not good for the baby. And so I was able to keep Xavier, go into the house, sit down, vote. I'm still holding him. I'm still snuggling him. And then once the vote, or even put him back on my breast, if I could, if it was good for him to do that. So I would do that sometimes. Vote, stand up. I got my baby, I'm breastfeeding, stand up and vote and be done and go back to my office. So it was a real practical thing for the well-being of my child. And the fact that everybody in the house got that, like, it just wasn't an issue in BC. I was so lucky. Yeah.
And I mean, votes are also, there's not like an endless amount of time that you have to get to the house. Like
got 5 minutes.
Like, yeah, it is times. Like there's like a clock, right?
When I say I'm running with my baby, because the most of my 5 minutes was getting him off my breast.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, that can also, just as an FYI for someone who hasn't experienced, it can also be painful. yeah, it can be painful and really hard on the baby because they don't know why their time with you is getting interrupted and they're still probably hungry.
Yeah.
And it's timed. And you're right, in a minority government, when literally everyone has to be there, otherwise the government that you belong to will fall. That's like a really big political problem.
And that's coming up a lot in my book, right? It wasn't.
Oh, and so I forgot to mention, so you are working on a new book. You're
I
working on a
am.
book. So
Yeah.
it's called Minister Mom.
The
Sorry,
working
I should have.
title,
Oh,
Minister
working
Mom.
title. Okay.
And I'm halfway done writing it, and it's been really awesome. I've been doing this project while also taking the U of T, University of Toronto Creative Writing Certificate. So their program has really helped me hone my skills as a writer, and also kind of focus me to get down and start writing. And so one of the themes that keeps coming up is that I had to balance the reality of we're in a minority government, and it really meant a lot to me to make sure that our government succeeded. But also I wanted to be a good mom, and so always trying to figure that out and find that balance when I couldn't just say, oh well, I can't be in the house for this and that and the other thing because my child needs me, and we can rejig my schedule and stuff like that. I don't need to be in the house. I don't have a bill up or anything like that. And so that wasn't the option. Like I had to be in the legislature every single day, all day. And so Xavier would be with his dad, and his dad would bring him to the legislature to get fed. And there was a lot of back and forth and transitioning in the day just for this little baby. And so we had to figure it all out, and we did. But it was definitely very challenging. And so the book has that theme coming up because and how the minority government influenced a lot of the decisions that we were making as parents.
Yeah, that's like that's a lot, and I can't even imagine like the mental aspect of that for you and your family, like your entire family unit, and not being in a riding that's particularly close to Victoria. You live Nelson-Castlegar's the airport that you use is in Castlegar and is notorious. I believe that its nickname is Cancelgar.
It is.
Yes, because of its location, the clouds, like the weather. The politics of being in a minority government doesn't care if your Air Canada flight is delayed or canceled, right? Like the world keeps on moving and you need to get there.
Yeah,
but with
exactly.
a baby is like way more.
Yeah, and my life went from being just me running around airports with a little roller bag and spending a lot of time waiting for a flight to come or go, or having to use a different airport and then drive through a blizzard over a mountain pass to get home. Because one of the most wonderful things about Nelson and the West Kootenays is that they're really hard to get to. And one of the worst things about Nelson and the West Kootenays is that they're really hard to get to. And so the travel was really hard when I was by myself. So then I have a baby, and my family, my husband, my son, and I were all traveling together as a family, and we would reduce the amount of travel so that we'd spend a whole month in Victoria while the house was in session, for example. And then we'd start to miss home because we love where we live. We love our home, and we'd start to miss home. And so that would become just hard, just to be in a different place that we didn't, that wasn't our place. That wasn't the place that we loved the most in the world. And so that would become challenging. But yeah, running through the airports and first-time parents. So it's not like, this was our second kid and we had everything dialed. We were figuring things out. So we had this stroller that would just be packed to the rafters. Like the amount of junk we were putting on that stroller. And then these giant suitcases, right, with like all the diapers and clothes. And well, we had two different houses, a place that we stayed in Victoria. So we didn't always have to travel with a, whole thing of diapers, but still, like, traveling with diapers, traveling with a special seat, because we also wanted to make the transition less for him. So there was the same type of clip-on high chair, right? Like, so for eating at the table, like, and then we had a whole setup in the legislature as well. So we're transporting all this stuff all over the province on a regular basis. My son had elite status with Aeroplan in his first year of life. So even though we had reduced our travel, we still were traveling a lot. And again, that's a theme that comes up because there was this 3-week period where we went from Nelson to Victoria, Victoria to Vancouver, Vancouver up to Fort St. John, over to Dawson Creek, over to Grand Prairie, through 4 airports to get home to Nelson.
Wow.
And that was just 3 weeks.
Yeah, that's a lot. That would be really hard. Hard on you, hard on the baby in some ways. You're going to have such amazing tales to tell him when he's older.
Yeah. Somebody, my former communications director, when I was in the Ministry of Energy and Mines, he was so kind, and he made a special commemorative, I guess a board, right? Like, he took the cover of the Times Colonist that had Xavier's first day in the legislature, and he had a special commemorative board made of it. And so there Xavier is, like, it's in our house, it's on my political wall. And so Xavier, when he's a teenager, he's going to be able to show all his friends, like, I was on the front page of the province. He was on the front page of the province. I think he was day 3 of his life.
Wow.
And he was on the front cover of the Times Colonist, being the first baby in the legislature when he was 3 months old. So he's had this entirely famous life before he was even 1 year old, and now he's 4. And of course, he doesn't remember any of that, and he just wants to do his science experiments, bake, and watch Gecko's Garage is the newest one.
Oh, I've seen that.
Yeah.
Yep. The things that I've seen that I never imagined. Gecko's Garage being one of them.
Yep.
Well, what are some other themes that you're kind of like finding keep coming up as you're writing, like, around your political life as a mom and as a woman?
I think we touched on it earlier in our conversation, but what I've been naming it is the trailblazer theme. And it goes back to what you're saying, is like how our system was built by men for men. It's an 800-year-old political system, a governance system. And for the vast majority of those 800 years, it was only men, and only men of a certain class as well. And so,
ethnicity,
absolutely, right? Like, it was the wealthy Caucasian men whose wives would be at home looking after the children, and before that, it'd be their wives, the families, governesses and nannies looking after the children. So it's a very upper class structure, and only in the last 100 years has that structure been challenged. And it's been challenged by everybody else in society, which is the majority of people in society. And so for me as a woman, and becoming a mom, like, there's been so many women doing so many amazing things over the last 120 years, challenging the system. But for me, I got there, and there were still certain barriers to being a mom and being an MLA, being a minister. And we named one, which was just being able to bring your child onto the floor of the legislature. But there's other things that are more subtle that aren't as public. And one was assumptions around availability. That as a minister, like it's an incredible job. It's just full on, like being an MLA is full on. And one of the things I touch on in the book is that when you're in public office, you're on all the time, even when you think you're not. And so say you've got a cold like I do now, and you're not feeling very well, and you don't get dressed up, you're running down to the grocery store to grab one thing, and you think you're going to be in and out. But next thing you know, someone's yelling at you for something. You might have your child with you, and that doesn't necessarily stop them. And so they're trying to hold that boundary with someone, like, okay, you're going to have to call me during office hours, please, or you're going to have to call me. We're going to have to talk about this another time. We're going to have to set up an appointment because I now have a crying baby because you're yelling at me and I got to go. Or you're not yelling at me. You're being really polite, but you've got an issue. I still got a crying baby and I got to go. Or whatever it is. Or my baby's at home and I have to go because I got 5 minutes before I know they're going to be hungry. And the only person who's going to feed them is me because that's my body. So there's a lot of that kind of, and also in terms of when I could make appointments for meetings, right? Like there were times in the day that I had to dedicate to my son that I could not have a meeting because that's when I fed my son. And a lot of people were like, well, why won't you just pump? Well, pumping's really inefficient, first off. Breastfeeding is much more efficient in terms of time, but it's also the bonding, it's the emotional connection. There's a lot of other things going on there that are really important for that parent-child bonding time. That is other than just the basic physical nourishment as well. And then there's also other factors that were involved with just availability. So it might not be that I was feeding him, but it was time that I had dedicated to spend with him, because in the legislature, you're there for 10, 12 or more hours in a day. And I can't be away from my child for that long. I didn't want to. I should say that. I didn't want to. That was my choice.
They're so little. They're so little.
Yeah. And he needed me. And so a lot of the time, like Xavier would come with me to whatever it is I was going to, but then there's sometimes that just wasn't appropriate either. And so trailblazing in terms of having really strong boundaries around work life and family, because in politics, those boundaries erode very, very quickly normally.
And do you think that were you the one, so you were the one creating the boundaries, but did you also have to, did you feel like you always had to justify them?
Oh yeah, definitely. Most people were really understanding, and I have to say that the support that I got, especially from my MLA colleagues, especially my caucus, because that's who I would deal with more often, was tremendous. Xavier would come into caucus meetings and I'd be nursing him in caucus meetings and nobody batted an eye. It was normal. And that's what I wanted. And, or when I was done feeding him, instead of like him having to leave the room, like he would just be there on the ground, kind of playing, doing his thing, crawling around. And again, everybody thought it was awesome. And so I got a lot of support that way. But, some people definitely were concerned with my availability and were, I think, if I'm generous, they were nervous about us being new and what expectations were on us and everything. And so I think they overreacted and kind of would have these expectations that I should just get a nanny. Right? Can't I just have a nanny? Can't Zach, my husband, just be looking after Xavier all the time? Like, can't I just drop my kid off and him not be with me and so on? And that wasn't how I was choosing to parent. And he wasn't with me all the time. Like, he was with me actually a very little amount of time. but how it changed my availability to travel. I think also some people from the Lower Mainland didn't understand how hard it was to get in and out of where I live, and how hard it is to get into other rural parts of British Columbia. And when you have a Ministry of Energy and Mines, like it's going from rural place to rural place, it's good to have a rural minister who understands the nature of how these industries impact our rural communities. It's really, really ideal to have a rural minister in that portfolio. But it also makes it harder to get all around the province and to all these different sites of industry and to see what's going on. And I did the best I could, and I traveled a lot, even while I was pregnant and with a kid in tow. But some people, it still wasn't good enough. And that's when I felt like I was hitting a glass ceiling. And the difference between being a trailblazer and hitting a glass ceiling is trailblazer is that you're making the trail and you're having progress, right? And you have support along the way. Hitting a glass ceiling is when you hit a barrier and you can see the other side, but you're not able to get there. And I felt like in certain instances, I was hitting a glass ceiling with expectations around what people wanted me to do rather than seeing what I was actually doing. They didn't see me for what I could do. They just saw me for what I couldn't do. And so they were then coming to the conclusion that maybe I shouldn't be in the role that I had.
Yeah, no, I fundamentally disagree with that.
Yeah, right?
Right? Like it would be amazing to me to one day see, a cabinet full of, moms with small children. Like that to me would be, kind of a magical moment. But on the flip side, I feel like there are always going to be people who are just, like having children is a choice. You chose this job, and it's just, those views are so harmful, and the harm that they do to individuals, but also they maintain and uphold the systems that everyone else is trying to dismantle. And for very good reason, because those systems have to change change because of people like you who make them change.
Well, democracy is about all of us. And if you have a system that is inherently creating barriers from all of us participating one way or another, whether as an office or voters or so on, then you don't have a functioning democracy. And so we need to be represented in our political institutions in our full diversity. And so if we have a system that doesn't allow for parents to be there, recognizing the demands of the job and having to find a way to meld the two, if there's a barrier to meld the two, then we will lose a large part of our population from being able to be represented. And that inherently is not democratic.
I completely agree. And I think that especially right now in the political climate that we're in and seemingly finding in ourselves forevermore, maybe, which is unfortunate, is that those democratic institutions are really important, and who is able to access them, maintain them, but also modify them for the better and not for the worse is really important.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's the thing about democracy is, I remember a long time ago, I was at this event and this young woman was on a panel with me, and she was a little bit more radical, quite a lot more radical than I am.
On the left or the right?
I don't know, because when somebody makes a statement like this, it can go either way. And
Okay.
she said, "We don't live in a democracy." And I was just floored. And now, if you don't believe we live in a democracy, what do you think democracy is? It's imperfect. Inherently, it's going to be imperfect. So if you're looking for perfection, perfection only exists by one person's definition, and that person will be the dictator. democracy is all of us coming together in all of our flaws, in all of our best potential and all of our best characteristics as well. So democracy is always going to have flaws. And what makes it grand is that it is dynamic, it changes. And so when I was faced with having to make some changes, because I wanted to be there and I knew that I should be there despite my different needs all of a sudden being a new mom, I knew that the system, even if it placed barriers, there were still opportunities in our democratic system to make those changes and to keep moving democracy along. And whenever somebody thinks that we don't live in a democratic system because they're trying to find some form of perfection, that worries me greatly, because that always leads in one direction. And whether it's via a communist ideology or via a fascist ideology, it always ends up into a very small group of people having a whole lot of power and everybody else being subjected to that power. And I personally don't want to live in that kind of environment.
Neither do I. And I don't want that for my children or your children or anyone's children. And I think the hard part right now is this, and the polarization that we're in, is that, is that messiness. And there's there are people obviously who are very outspoken, and rightly so. That's their right to speak out about this messiness and how imperfect it is. But the opposite is something that I don't think anyone wants. I hope not, because it would lead us to a very different place. And we can see that happening in other parts of the world where there is only one way, and I will tell you what that way is. And it's very dangerous for you to have a different understanding of that. And the world is a very complicated place, but you get to live in a very beautiful place that, although Nelson does have its own unique political dynamic, I would say, from my experience.
Yeah, it definitely does.
Yeah. I just, I love chatting with you. I mean, obviously even though we were on different teams, I celebrate, I love, when your election, I love seeing you in the legislature. Like, I love seeing, without, being like, she's not on my team or whatever. To me, it was just momentous that you were there. The things that you got done, your advocacy for Jumbo, for example, which is a glacier, and like on the environmental side, that you were in mining, which is a very male dominated portfolio, on the bureaucracy side, as well as on the political side. You really truly were a trailblazer in BC politics.
Well, thank you. Yeah. It was awesome. I loved the work and I loved being there. And it's interesting, when you're a young woman in politics, there's all kinds of barriers, but just by showing up, you're tearing down a lot of those barriers and inspiring other people, other young people, other women to get involved and to run for office as well. And I don't want to say that it's because of me, because it's not. It's because of so many people volunteering and making it happen and supporting the other young women who have been running in the Kootenays since over the last 20 years and getting elected. There's so many volunteers, but namely those young women who've been gaining office and taking leadership roles in this area. It's been phenomenal. And hey, the more of us, the merrier, because it really does change it changes politics. It changes our institutions. I know one really amazing young woman who was a city councillor or a town councillor in Creston, and she was the regional district director. Her name's Jen Comer. And she had a baby while she was the regional district director for the town of Creston. And there was no mat leave policy. And so there she was, finding herself a trailblazer, getting a mat leave policy for the RDCK. And it's in those small ways, every time we show up and we remind our institutions that we're here, and we have to change things so that we can continue to be here, is a very good thing.
Well, and I mean, you come from a political party that is doing, I mean, I'll be honest, when I worked in the legislature, when you got elected, I was opposed to the NDP's equity policy. I am no longer opposed to it. I am a champion of it. I think it is, like I see why it's necessary, and I firmly believe in it now. And it was unfortunate that I was opposed to it, but I've come around, which I don't think is a bad thing. But I mean, even going back to like, as someone who's from BC, I love BC, but I mean, even going back all the way to 2001, like thinking about, in that election where there were only two women in the House on the NDP side, Joy McPhail and Jenny Kwan, who held an entire government, BC Liberal government, to account. Your party has a strong tradition of having strong women involved, and that I greatly admire.
Oh, for sure. I had so many mentors. I was Carol James being at the top of that list. What a dynamo she is. And Joy McPhail as well. There's actually a moment in the book where it's the day that we all got sworn in. And we're at the legislature after the swearing in ceremony for all of us in cabinet. And it's a big party, big party.
I'm sure.
There. And people were lined up to go into the legislature. People were lined up for the ice cream. We ran out of ice cream in 15 minutes. It was just like a massive party, so many people. And I'm just standing there chatting with someone. And then I hear a familiar voice, Michelle, you look fabulous. And I turn around and who is it but Joy McPhail? And so Joy McPhail, one, thought I looked fabulous. And then she follows that up with, Michelle, I'm so proud of you. And it's just one of those amazing moments. Her and Jack Layton have both in my lifetime have told me that they were proud of me. And it was just like these giants in my political party who are looking at me and I make them proud. Like, I don't have words to describe that feeling, that how it made me feel. But I was doing something right anyway. And yeah, such amazing women. And that equity mandate, yeah, a lot of people didn't like it, but a lot of people have come around to understand that it's what worked. And I'm so proud to be in that party. And I supported it right from the beginning, because as much as we wish we didn't need it, we do. And that's what makes a difference.
And you're also, there's nothing less about any of the people who get elected because of that policy. You are actually the most qualified, like, the highest caliber and quality of people. It's just about, that equity, like truly the equity piece. And some political parties who don't, who are still reluctant and don't see the value in that, I believe, are going to be, punished by voters for their lack of, changing with the world, because voters, I believe, want to see political parties that look like the entire province or the riding or the constituency or the municipality that they represent. And if you're not doing that, then, that says, in my opinion, everything I need to know about your party or your politicians or your platform.
Absolutely. It's where the world is going. It's same with corporate boards, for example. A lot of corporations are realizing that they have to diversify their boards. It's what their shareholders are looking for. And it's the same thing at the political level, at the democratic level, in terms of voters. And the reason why our party did the equity mandate was because that voters were ahead of the parties. Voters were looking for that diversity, and parties were thinking, oh, we have to have a man. I heard it. I've heard this in my lifetime. We need to have a man as our candidate. That's who's going to be winnable. And that's not actually what the voters think, but it is what people in parties worry about because they want to win so badly. And I understand that. You understand that desire to win. And it's real and it's not going away. So we have to have some type of mandate that forces the party to challenge itself to actually do what voters are looking for.
Yeah, 100%. And well, you're although you're not an MLA any longer, your party is locked in with a solid majority. MLAs now have a little bit of luxury of not having to always be in the House. And the people of BC gave the BC NDP a resounding vote of confidence. And we'll see what happens in the next election. But we've gone over time, which usually happens actually, despite my best intentions, because the conversations end up being so fascinating, and this one is just the same. But I really want to thank you for taking part and for talking with me. And I love talking with you. I feel like we could be friends, actually. Or that's just my like. I just really enjoy you and the time that you've given me. And I also want to say, I hope that at some point, if you haven't done it already, that you share those same words that Jack Layton and Joy McPhail shared with you, that they were proud of you, with someone else who, is coming up within the ranks of the NDP, because I feel like that's something that should be passed on.
Absolutely. That's one of the things that, now that I'm out of public life, I've been helping other people with their elections. My successor, Brittany Anderson, another amazing young woman, she was elected at 34 years old. And then this last municipal election here in Nelson, coaching other women candidates. And so as RuPaul does, once you've blazed the trail and broken down some barriers, you have to turn around and you have to help the others who are coming up after you. And it's I totally believe in that philosophy. And I am so proud of two of the women that I was helping and coaching in this municipal election here in Nelson topped the polls, one for school board and one for city council. And they just worked it. They worked so hard. We also have a woman mayor now in Nelson. And so she's the second woman to be mayor in Nelson. And so we're coming up, we're making changes, we're blazing trails, as the women's movement always does. And Sarah, it's just really been great to chat with you here. And thanks so much for inviting me to be on your show. And I think we can be friends despite the political divide. I think so. The next time I come to Calgary, or next time you come to Nelson, we'll have to go for coffee.
I'd love that. Yeah, I don't, the partisan politics too. I don't subscribe to the idea that, just because you belong to different parties, or, well, I don't belong to any party anymore. That you have different ideologies doesn't mean that you still can't, talk with people, or, have a coffee or have a glass of wine, or, I think that's a really common misconception about people. It depends on the legislature, it depends on the people, but, often, people aren't always, politics is a lot of, drama, in my opinion, like the theatrical nature of it all. And then, when question period is over, then you just go back to being not so theatrical, and more just, a regular person who, is trying to do something good for their province.
Well, in all my days in the halls of that legislature, I never saw a partisan dissolve as quickly as it did when Xavier was in my arms. Yeah,
that's very, very telling and very, very unfortunate.
Yeah, well, I thought it was a good thing, right? Like, you put a baby in the room and we all became human. And that was just awesome. Like, we, the partisan nature of politics is the heated part of democracy. It's the debate. It's where we can be passionate. And that's wonderful, right? That we all care so much. And we do it without guns and weapons in our system.
Yeah.
Really
or swords. Or swords. Because like the way that the desks are placed, right, is actually so they're 2 sword lengths apart.
That's right. Yeah. And so no swords, no weapons, no anything, and just words, right? And words can be really intense, but we all know, as we all are in there, that's part of it. But yeah, walking around in the halls of the legislature with Xavier, like everybody would just melt, and we all just became human beings. And it was some of my best moments in the legislature where we were in the halls with people from other parties while I was holding Xavier.
That's lovely. I just wish it didn't, take an innocent little new baby to create that kind of bipartisanship. But it does change the dynamic. So yeah. Well, I really want to wish you all the best on finishing your book. I do love the working title, Minister Mom. I think that's really kind of like catchy. but yeah, I'm eager to read it when it's done. So do you think it'll come out next year, or is that something you have any?
I'm not too sure. So this January, I'm going to be shopping it around and seeing what publishers think about it, and we'll go from there.
Okay. Well, I look forward to adding it to my political book collection. And
I would be honored if it was in your store.
Oh, I would be honored if that happened too. I'm guessing you haven't heard the news then that I've said that I would like to sell the store and the business. Yes. It's just a little bit too political for my mental health.
Okay, I hear you.
So yeah, if it's on one side, I've got like it's a lot to unpack. But yeah, that's something. But I'm hoping that my best case scenario is that someone else takes it on and continues what I've done. I feel like your comments actually at the start of the podcast about hitting a glass ceiling, that really resonated with me, because I just don't have the capacity to do more financial, emotional, mental, physical in any way. Yeah.
I hear you. When you're done, you're done, and that's the time to pass the baton.
Yeah. So
it's good to know. It's good to know it, right?
Yeah. So it's not going to go away. It's just, I'm hoping to pass the baton on to someone else.
Right on. Well, I look forward to getting updates on what's going on with Madam Premier.
Yeah.
Great store. I've already been purchasing things, and on election day for local government here in BC, Xavier was wearing his Future Voter t-shirt.
Oh, I love it. That's amazing. The messages are really important to me, and that people find meaning in is beyond. But yeah. Well, let's stay in touch. The next time you're in Calgary, I'd love to see you, and we can continue chatting about all of these things, and hopefully with a copy of your book in my hands.
Excellent. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thanks so much, Sarah.
Yeah. Thanks, Michelle.
All right. Take care.
Thanks.